A news report on TV had just shocked the public because the court decided to release a major mafia boss named Gaetano. They ruled that Gaetano had no connection to the various crimes that had taken place in the city. Even though everyone knew that Gaetano was the one behind the drug trade, human trafficking, and illegal weapon sales. After being cleared of all charges, Gaetano immediately threw a party and invited his old friends, including his associates from the Mafia world. There, we are introduced to a low-level Mafia member named Looney, who is Gaetano's business partner. Looney arrived with his two bodyguards and his right-hand man, Nicky, before the party started. Looney went to see Gaetano to collect a payment for the marijuana powder that still hadn't been paid. However, instead of paying the full amount, Gaetano only paid half the bill and told Looney to leave. Gaetano said that Looney's product wasn't good enough, so he planned to find a replacement from another distributor. Hearing that, Looney could only protest a little before finally accepting Gaetano's decision.
Shit in the bag, for Christ's sake.
Hey, I've arranged for my customs guy Simmons to be on
Package. I fucking knew it.
You might like to remember, I'm the top earner.
You make one move, you greasy fuck.
Not long after the feast began, Looney, feeling disappointed, chose not to join everyone else and got ready to leave the place. However, without anyone expecting it, the house where the party was being held that night had already become the target of a man who suddenly went on a rampage. The commotion downstairs made Looney and his men decide to run away. At the same time, the man who had gone on a rampage tried to chase them. However, he suddenly stopped when one of Gaetano's remaining men pointed a gun at him. When the man turned around, Gaetano's subordinate immediately became terrified. At this moment, we finally learned that the mysterious man was well known for slaughtering criminals. He was nicknamed the Punisher, and the public respected him so much that they even considered him a hero. After that, the Punisher immediately chased after Looney, who had managed to escape to his hideout. For your information, Looney usually hid his illegal business activities behind a glass recycling factory. Right now, Looney is asking Nicky to prepare all their men to stand guard in case the Punisher, who had gone on a rampage earlier, really came to their place. However, even though Looney's headquarters was now heavily guarded by his men, that was no problem for the Punisher. The Punisher's attack sent Looney falling into a grinding machine. Meanwhile, Nicky and several other Mafia members were already lying dead. The problem was, the FBI suddenly arrived at the scene, forcing the Punisher to find cover. In the middle of the shootout, the Punisher realized that Nicky, whom he had just killed, was actually an undercover FBI agent. As if realizing his mistake and knowing this would become a much bigger problem, the Punisher eventually decided to run away. Sometime later, the Punisher arrived at his hideout and looked deeply regretful about what had just happened. If the Punisher had known that Nicky was an FBI agent, he definitely would have made an exception for him. Meanwhile, the FBI agents began investigating the scene and recovered all the bodies, including Nicky's. On the other hand, Looney had actually survived after being trapped inside the glass processing machine. Seriously injured, Looney was quickly taken away by two of his men to avoid being caught by the FBI, and then received treatment from their trusted doctor. Nicky's death left his family and colleagues devastated. Nicky was known as a kind-hearted agent who always cared about his subordinates. After the funeral was over, an agent named Paul immediately met with his superior to ask for permission to arrest the Punisher. However, the two got into an argument because Paul's superior believed that the Punisher had not intentionally killed Nicky. On top of that, the Punisher had helped the FBI take down many Mafia groups over the years. According to his superior, it would be better to forgive the Punisher than to arrest him. Hearing that, Paul immediately disagreed and insisted on arresting the Punisher. According to Paul, people have the right to fight crime, but they still have to follow the law and cannot take justice into their own hands.
Donatelli sent us a message.
How is it we're not all over Frank Castle?
Believe me, No one's more pissed off about it than I am.
After Nicky's funeral, the Punisher went to his grave and prayed that Nicky would rest in the best place. The Punisher felt deeply guilty about what had happened, as a way of taking responsibility. From that day on, Nicky's wife and children would always be under his protection. After that, the Punisher went straight to the graves of a woman and 2 young girls. He was seen crying there. This is where we get a glimpse of the Punisher's tragic past. The Punisher's real name is Frank, and Frank was a former Army colonel. One day, Frank was spending a relaxing day at the city park with his wife and 2 children. However, their happiness was suddenly shattered when 2 Mafia groups got into a gunfight. Unfortunately, Frank and his family ended up becoming victims of the incident. Frank survived the attack, but his wife and both of his children did not. What made it even more painful was that the Mafia members responsible for the incident were simply released by the court. From that day on, Frank decided to retire early and dedicate the rest of his life to hunting down the Mafia. Frank knew that the law would never be enough to stop them, so he chose to punish them in his own way. The next day, Paul went to see another agent named William to get information about the Punisher. There, William explained the Punisher's background and why he was so difficult for law enforcement to capture. In fact, the NYPD, the FBI, and even the CIA had all tried to catch him before, but every attempt had failed. As a former Marine, Frank had military skills that allowed him to escape from law enforcement with ease. On top of that, no one knew where he lived, so every operation to capture Frank ended in failure. After hearing the explanation, Paul immediately asked William to work with him so they could capture the man who had killed their colleague.
I have a feeling that's about to change.
The castle survived.
You know, I've been waiting for someone like you.
The alleged Punisher murders.
Meanwhile, Frank was being visited by a man named Diego. Diego was like Frank's assistant, responsible for gathering information, providing supplies, and helping him obtain weapons. It's unknown how they first met or started working together. However, Diego was currently giving Frank information about Nicky's family. At the end of their conversation, Frank expresses regret for killing a good man like Nicky. Frank truly didn't know what he could do to make up for his mistake.
But the Fed is eating you up inside, but that doesn't mean you pack
In the field. One of the good guys. I fucked up, Micro.
After getting information about Nicky's family, Frank went to Nicky's child school and saw that Nicky's wife now had to live as a single mother. Seeing that made Frank feel even more guilty, and he became determined to make amends for what he had done. A week passed. We are now shown that Looney had fully recovered. However, because of the many cuts on his face caused by broken glass, Looney's appearance was no longer the same. At that moment, one of Looney's men explained that Nicky had actually been an undercover FBI agent. The problem was that, outside his assignment, Nicky had secretly stolen $10 million from the organization. They suspected the money was hidden in Nicky's house, so they planned to make another move to take it. Meanwhile, we cut to a psychiatric hospital where a patient and notorious criminal named Jigsaw was going through his usual therapy session. Not long after that, Looney arrived to free him. Here, we learn that Jigsaw is Looney's younger brother. That day, Looney had no choice but to take Jigsaw with him because he was short on men to get revenge on Frank for ruining his face.
Really?
Lead everybody out the horse.
That night, Frank gathered the courage to visit Nicky's wife's house to apologize. At first, Frank wasn't welcomed by Nicky's wife, Angela. However, after Frank explained why he had come and gave her compensation money, Angela finally accepted it. At that moment, Frank briefly explained that he was a Punisher and that he had accidentally killed Angela's husband while he was undercover. Frank sincerely apologized for what had happened and promised that he would always protect Angela and her daughter from any danger.
Who punishes you?
A good agent keeps his family safe. This.
Mom, I need it.
Take it.
The next day, Frank went to Diego's house, where Diego lived with his mother and younger brother. At that time, Frank planned to retire as a Punisher because he felt that what happened the other day made him no different from the Mafia. Hearing that, Diego said he couldn't stop Frank from making that decision. However, there was one thing Frank needed to know. Looney was still alive. The Mafia boss had been saved by two of his men, and they would definitely seek revenge on Nicky's family, because they believed Nicky had betrayed them. After hearing that, Frank had no choice but to postpone his decision to complete one last mission.
Out of town?
Let the cops take care of him.
I'm gonna tell you when something happens to Mrs. Donna.
That night, Looney, along with several of his men and Jigsaw, went to Nicky's wife's house to look for their money. Their arrival naturally terrified Angela and her child. They truly didn't know what to do.
Also like to swear on an imaginary... Not you, sweet cheeks.
At the same time, Frank was interrogating one of Looney's former men to find out where the Mafia boss was. Out of fear, the former subordinate finally revealed that his boss was on his way to Nicky's house to get revenge. According to him, Nicky had betrayed them and stolen $10 million from the organization. After hearing that information, Frank immediately rushed to Nicky's house. However, on the way there, Paul suddenly showed up and stopped him.
Stay out of my way.
During the fight, Frank had killed Paul right away, but he chose not to. Instead of leaving Paul behind, Frank asked him to come with him to Nicky's house because Nicky's family was in danger. Hearing that, Paul finally agreed and called William to come pick them up. They then arrived at Nicky's house and found that there were already visitors inside. There, Paul told Frank and William to stay in the car while he went inside and tried to stop the Mafia. At first, Frank doubted that Paul could handle it. However, the bald cop confidently said that dealing with the Mafia was just another day on the job for him. Of course, Paul was just bluffing. As soon as he entered the house, instead of taking down the Mafia, he looked completely confused. Outside the house, William had been waiting for 10 minutes without hearing a single sound and started to worry about Paul. Having no other choice, William was finally forced to let Frank go so he could do what he always did.
Fucking are!
With his bare hands, Frank managed to take down Looney's men and capture the Mafia boss along with Jigsaw. After that, Frank took Angela and her daughter to hide at a safe house. Frank had no choice but to do that because, in his opinion, Looney and Jigsaw would be released again before long, just like always. Too many law enforcement officers in that city abused their power. So, until Frank managed to eliminate Looney, Angela and her daughter had to remain in hiding.
I want a lawyer.
Meanwhile, Looney was being interrogated by an FBI agent named Miller. Miller explained the possible sentence Looney could face. However, there was nothing to worry about because everything could be taken care of with money. Hearing that, Looney immediately realized that Miller was a corrupt agent. Without hesitation, Looney bribed Miller with money so he could be released. The next day, Diego's younger brother went to Frank's hideout to let him know that Diego couldn't come as usual. Their mother's condition wasn't good, so Diego had decided to stay and take care of her. After hearing that, Frank asked Diego's younger brother to protect Angela. Meanwhile, Frank would go visit their house. When Frank arrived, he was met with a horrifying sight. Diego's mother had been killed in a gruesome way. Meanwhile, Diego had apparently been kidnapped by someone. It didn't take long to find out who was responsible because Looney and Jigsaw were currently holding Diego captive and forcing him to reveal the location of Frank's hideout. A short time later, Looney and Jigsaw arrived at Frank's hideout. They immediately attacked Diego's younger brother and kidnapped Angela along with her daughter.
Run!
Not long after that, Frank returned to his hideout and found Diego's younger brother sitting there weak after losing a lot of blood. With the little strength he had left, Diego's younger brother told Frank that the person behind everything was none other than Looney. They had left behind a note saying that if Frank wanted to save Angela, her daughter, and Diego, he had to come to an old hotel that had been abandoned for years. At the end of his life, Diego's younger brother, no longer able to endure the pain, asked Frank to just kill him.
Don't let me die like this, man.
Meanwhile, Looney was recruiting every gangster in the city to join his crew. Looney offered to pay each person $100,000 if they were willing to protect him from the Punisher.
The only one can take the law into... Well, I say we've all suffered loss.
The next day, Frank arranged to meet Paul at an old church on the outskirts of the city. There, Frank blamed Paul for everything that had happened because, in his opinion, it was all the result of Paul's foolishness. Looney was now free again and had managed to kidnap Diego along with Nicky's family. Frank's harsh words left Paul feeling deeply ashamed because his arrogance had completely fallen apart due to the actions of a corrupt FBI agent who accepted a bribe. At that moment, Frank also explained that this was exactly why he continued to be the Punisher. In his opinion, the law in that country simply couldn't be enforced by the people responsible for upholding it. At the end of their conversation, Paul, feeling ashamed and with very few options left, told Frank that he was free to slaughter Looney and his men. Paul even guaranteed that Frank's actions would not be prosecuted, so Frank could do what he had to do. A short time later, Frank arrived at the hotel where Looney was and immediately attacked everyone there. Even though Looney had recruited many gangsters beforehand, they still couldn't stop Frank, who was already furious over everything that had happened. Besides, this mission to kill Looney was his final mission as the Punisher. Because of that, Frank carried out his attack without any hesitation.
Don't be shy. Ah, you bastard. No!
Looney was finally killed, and his body was burned on a pile of fire. After that, Frank immediately rescued everyone and led them out of the building. Not long afterward, Paul and William finally arrived and immediately evacuated Angela and her family. Before they parted ways, Paul told Frank that if he still wanted to hunt down the Mafia, Paul was willing to join him. William said the same thing. With the FBI's resources and intelligence, Frank would no longer have to struggle to gather information on the Mafia members he was targeting. The movie ends.